Welcome to the WebWell Podcast, brought to you by Cascade Web Development. I'm one of your hosts, Simon, along with Ben, and we can't wait to dive into all things internet, tech, web development, and web design. We'll also be discussing how we balance work and life and exploring the fascinating world of internet innovation. So whether you're a tech enthusiast or just looking for some entertainment, join us on this exciting journey as we explore the ever-changing landscape of the web. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the WebWell Podcast, episode number 8. We're very excited to include Zach Hyder from Hubbell Communications in today's podcast. Of course, I am here with Simon Hart, who we co-host this podcast a couple times a month. And today's topic is a pretty fun one. The idea is no more free pitches and RFPs. So really excited to unpack this conversation with Zach. I know he's got a ton of experience in this realm. And welcome, Zach Hyder.
Great to be here, gentlemen. Thank you for the invite to talk about this. And I will say, Ben, just to amend the title there, it's maybe not no more free pitches. It's just very selectively deciding when you're going to sort of give up your time for free. But this is a topic I love. This is something I've worked on my entire career, and it's become a little bit of a passion topic for me because it's difficult for agencies to figure out how to do this.
Yeah, no, and I think it'll be wonderful not only for agencies to consider how they can and perhaps should show up to protect all of us, right, and the value that we do present, but also helpful for clients because they're oftentimes raised in cultures and see things on Mad Men and other types of shows and documentaries where it's kind of a common practice, and they might even be getting that from their leadership. So nuanced and it's always fun to chop it up and get your perspective on this as I continue to try and refine how we go about this subject as a general focus point.
Did you like that tag on LinkedIn, Ben? That was very timely, I thought.
It really was.
Yes.
Yeah, Zach sent me a
Don. Yeah, no, it's not happening. Yeah. He
sent me a link to a Mad Men clip where Don Draper was getting pressed by a apparently very successful, authoritative individual, and I think Don mentioned, well, I don't think you got in the executive suite here by giving stuff away for free, and then very gracefully provided some input and hopefully teed it up for some future work together. Well, I'd love to start off with a quick
show that link.
Go ahead.
We'll have to share that link.
Yeah, be awesome. Yeah, we'll share that in the show notes for sure. But just a brief history, looking at my relationship with Zach, which I think goes back now pushing 10 years. And my first awareness of Zach was when he was in Leadership Portland. I had gone through Leadership Portland a couple years ahead of Zach. And I can't remember when you did. I did in 2008. Do you recall when you did that?
I was the class of, I think, 2011.
Sounds about right.
And that's right. How did we meet? Because I remember you and I talked on the phone, but I can't remember what it was about.
Well, I was the Leadership Portland Alumni Association director, which got me a courtesy spot on the Portland Business Journal board of directors. And so I remained quite close to Leadership Portland groups that went through. And it should come as no surprise, Zach kind of bubbled up in the hierarchy of Leadership Portland class of 2011. So I think I found myself interacting with you on that. You were doing some speaking or different things. And certainly at graduation, you may have been the graduate speaker at graduation, perhaps.
My class speaker. I don't know how that happened, but that's right. And then you were forming like a work group or something. And I think you interviewed me, and God, that is a long time ago.
Yeah. Takes it back a little bit there. So that was pretty fun. I think we had a chance to work together, at least interact a bit when you were serving as creative director and vice president at Quinn Thomas. I believe the way the story goes is they used to be a client of ours, and then Zach came in and said, there's a better way. We're just going to throw this thing on WordPress. So there's that. But hey,
no hard
partnerships.
Still to me, Ben, when you tell these stories.
Nothing but love, Zach. Nothing but love. He then went on to found the Dendro Group after moving away from Quinn Thomas, and this is as LinkedIn promotes here, providing business development, brand positioning, and new client pitch counsel to executive leadership in communications, advertising, public relations, and digital marketing agency space. It turns out I was the first Dendrocast interview that Zach had. So we walked down that path together, and it was on culture. I really enjoyed that conversation with you, and I would highly recommend anyone go back into the Dendrocast archives. Some really good content there with some excellent agency folks that really from around the country that Zach's interacted with over the years, and touching on some timely topics as well as some evergreen content for everyone to enjoy. I'll keep going. As part of that, Zach launched, as I mentioned, the Dendrocast. I was on that, met a great group of folks associated with that. And I remember I actually went out to a Dendrocast gathering, I believe after the first year, and drove out there with Ward Hubbell, and had some great conversations with Ward about his agency and business and how he was looking at succession. And then it wasn't very long after that, and I was notified, hey, Zach's going to be coming on board and helping with the leadership transition at Hubbell Communications, which was really exciting to hear in terms of seeing how they were going to go down that path together. And lo and behold, it was right in the heart of the, I believe, the kind of the nadir of the pandemic. And so the work remote, hey, who's the new guy? What about other plans that were laid, et cetera? So really fun to observe that, and both from Zach's perspective and Ward's, and see the organization evolve over the last several years. Let's see. And then one thing that I found interesting is Hubbell continues to create some really compelling content around community issues. It's called the Better Communities Podcast, and really enjoyed the format that they've used, seeing how that's evolved and kind of grown from Dendrocast, and now been this pretty important part, I feel, to the content and the way that Hubbell is showing up in the marketplace. So those are some of the details that I'm aware of. But Zach, if you want to take us back a little further, I believe you're not a Portland native. I see you're a Red Sox fan. Maybe you could just kind of fill in some gaps there in terms of how you found yourself in the agency space and in Portland, Oregon.
Wow. Well, that's a very generous introduction setup. I don't know that I can add too much more. That was very well done. I wish every introduction was as gracious as that. So thank you. Yeah. I mean, I am technically a Portland native. I'm actually an Oklahoma native, but I don't tell very many people that. So your listeners now get to know that fun fact about me. No, but I grew up here in the Portland metro area. I've been here since I was, 5 or so years old. Did go to college in the Boston area. So yes, I am a Red Sox fan. Thank you for letting me wear this. This is technically a vacation day, so I didn't prep myself nearly as much as I should. Yeah, I'm an agency creature. I spent a brief stint in TV news, which was a disaster, and I'm glad I got out of it. And, immediately worked in the agency world and have been there ever since. And here's the thing. It is the most wonderfully horrible business. And what I mean is it's so fun. You get to be creative. It moves fast. You have a lot of diversity, and yet it is incredibly competitive. Clients can be very difficult. Ben, you and I were just talking over beers about the chat GPT AI joke that, don't worry, in the agency world, we're safe because clients still have to tell you exactly what they want. The joke being they never seem to know what they want. And it's a hard business. There's a lot of agencies, not just in the Portland metro area. There's a lot of agencies that I think Gina Maffei, our vice president at Hubbell, always says that at the end of the day, every agency is the same. She's not wrong. The services most agencies provide are pretty standard. It's the differentiation of really what makes you special. Is it an approach? Is it a mindset? Is it a philosophy? How you position yourself is what really sets you apart. And most agencies just don't do that very well, right? They sort of are generalists. They exist to sort of, service clients, make clients happy. And I've spent a lot of my career really just trying to sort of understand more, like what makes a great agency great, what makes an agency grow, what makes agencies die. You mentioned my consultancy that worked with agencies on just their business problems. So not client problems, but just their business problems. And, in the almost 5 years I was doing that, watched a couple agencies go away. It happens. Very successful ones. These were, 30, $40 million firms that were very big in their space who no longer exist. Right. So I'm fascinated by the agency business because it is such a fun, crazy thing to do for a living.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you here. This is going to be a fun topic. So again, kind of kicking things off, why agencies should stop pitching for free and doing RFPs. And again, slightly adjusted how to narrow our focus when it comes to those types of constructs so that we're setting ourselves and our clients up for a successful engagement. Does that sound about right, Zach?
Yeah, it's a great topic.
Indeed. So as I mentioned previously, got a great little clip of Don Draper, very capably and effectively shooting down a request for free work, but setting entree for opportunities to have a meaningful conversation that could turn into a paid engagement. I think that is, having that in your back pocket, or at least a perspective on that, should a client make that request. It's really smart for all of us. But by way of story, Zach, have you ever had any experiences that you could share with us here in the audience where you found yourself in a situation where someone was asking for free work and how you might have addressed that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, sometimes I think to myself, I've been at a few agencies in my career, and I think to myself, how much, if every single one of those, situations where you're asked to do something for free, or, I think one of the mistakes a lot of agencies make, Ben, is we offer to do free work because we think we're going to ingratiate ourselves, or we think that that is the only way to win business. But I go back in my career and I think, wow, I mean, millions of dollars in free work I have done in my career with teams that I've worked with. And I think again, it is, clients don't know what they can or cannot ask for, but agencies are also very willing to give them things that they should not give and they should not be asked for. And I think that this is as much a client problem as it is an agency problem.
Yeah.
And we have trained ourselves, I think, as an industry, we, the agency business, have trained ourselves to think that that is the only way to win new clients or keep existing clients, is to always be giving more than we should. And I don't think there's almost any other business in the world. It's one of the reasons why that Don Draper quote is so poignant. Is I think it's Conrad Hilton that he's talking to, right? Am I remembering correctly?
That's right.
Right. I mean, do hotels just give away free rooms? Probably not. Again, I'm not in the hotel business, but the point is, not many industries will do that because so much of what we are selling in our business is our time and our brain. It can be tempting and easy to say, okay, well, I'll give you my time, I'll give you my ideas, but that is really our two most valuable assets, are our time and our ideas.
Yep.
Why would we give away those things for nothing, right?
Right.
So it's difficult to sometimes know when to say no, how to say no, or to sort of do what Mr. Draper did so effectively, redirect the conversation towards something that is of value to both.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for agencies to know how to do that. And I've been in many rooms, Ben, where I've heard people say, well, the client's always right. And I hate that expression. No. Sometimes I don't think the client knows what else to ask for. It's just, that's how we've always done it. Put together an RFP, doesn't tell them a whole lot. There's not a lot of information in it. Let's make them guess. Let's not tell them what the budget is and see if they come in lower. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, right.
But let's see if they give us some free ideas. And I just think what's a terrible way to grow your business. It just is not it's very time intensive. So
yeah, one thing I found in our business is oftentimes we're responding to people coming up and saying, hey, we have a need. Can you help? And then we're trying to identify, is there a good fit? If there is, let's keep going. If not, perhaps not. But oftentimes we're saying, you tell us what your business is all about, and we'll tell you how we can help either optimize that, but certainly automate that with online tools. I do recall a period, though, where one of my previous colleagues here at Cascade had this idea of a video contest website, this notion of going to a brand and saying, hey, brand, we've got this vision. We could create this video contest website. You then can, via social media and email newsletters, solicit videos back, and the winner receives $1,000 worth of apparel and exposure on your website, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe actually there was going to be a video presentation at the end of all of the submissions, and they're going to make this whole brand effort around that. Well, this local, very notable apparel company said, no thanks, we'll pass. Literally a month later, that exact vision and the mock-up framework that we delivered to them as this idea was launched, and they were off and running. They just used their existing agency, and it was a brutal lesson to learn. And again, we're not in that zone really where, a company is coming and saying, or an organization and saying, we need a fresh brand perspective, a campaign, hit us with your best idea. And we're like finding that little nugget, that in that nugget, that kernel rolls out all of these brilliant ideas and executions. But I know a lot of folks in the creative space are in that realm. And as I recall, when I first started this business, I remember talking to some agencies, and they say, hey, the way we approach pitching is we try and get wrap our arms around what the budget is, and then we'll dedicate up to 20% of that budget toward the pitch and the creative and the ideas and the brainstorming in hopes of winning the business. And we'll put in a little footnote that says all of these ideas are the property of our agency, unless we get this work. Then it really plays out. And so that was shocking. 20%. You're thinking about a project that's $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 budget, and people are just blowing all their time resources. I just look at that and go, man, losing in that way would have been devastating to me. So what might be helpful for us here, Zach, in your mind, how do you define pitching? Like, where does that start and end? Because obviously you've got to get them a proposal, or at least an outline of process and timeline, scope, and budget. But how do you define pitching, and where does that line get drawn in your mind?
That's a great question, Ben, because for me, pitching has evolved. I mean, just to, share a little bit of my experience, how I learned how to pitch. And by the way, I will say, I am a person who loves pitching. Ask anybody at Hubbell, ask, my colleagues I've worked with at other agencies. I'm the guy that loves going in a room and talking to new people about new problems and new things. Love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. However, I have learned that there are ways you should not do it, and there are ways to do it that can be far more effective at helping you, win business, land new clients. I used to be in the agency world where it was all about the gimme. Right. It was, well, what are you, and I have actually been in pitches where I've heard the judges say, okay, well, this is the part where they're going to tell us all the stuff they're going to do for free, or this is the part where they're going to wow us with their new ideas. And I used to pitch like that. I used to think that was the expectation because that was the environment that I was in. I did a pitch for a big piece of business, big campaign down in Texas. Oh man, this is probably almost, a decade ago. And I am not kidding. After the presentation, we had orchestrated the side doors in the room where we were on to open. And we brought the client out into the parking lot and showed them a wrapped vehicle that was mocked up to look like what we were going to do with them for this, road tour we were going to do. We did it all on spec. I mean, that pitch probably cost us $50,000.
Brutal.
Now we got the business, but you know what's terrible? This was an incumbent pitch. We already had the business. And it's one of those things where I think sometimes that happens to agencies. It's like, well, we won the business, so it must have worked. And it's like, but we don't know cause and effect there. Did we win the business because we spent $50K and wrapped a bus with their logo and all their, all of our stuff? Did we win it for the new idea? So one of the things I started doing when I was consulting not just when I was consulting, but I started doing as when I was in the agency environment, is really always making sure I went back to the client when we lost, but certainly when we won, to say, okay, tell me exactly why you hired us. Because if you lose, that information is really valuable. Like, oh, one of the things that drives me nuts is when I had a pitch that I lost with an agency a while back, and they were like, oh, you guys were great. And I'm like, but you're not telling me why we lost. Yeah, you guys were really great. There's got to be a reason you chose somebody else. It's okay. That's one of the things we have to tell clients is like, it's okay to tell us why you didn't hire us. We're adults. Right. But getting that feedback on, the chemistry was off, or, sometimes it's, we just didn't have a good feeling about your understanding of this particular problem, or it's a service category that you didn't offer. That's super good feedback. But what I found in doing that is that 95-ish, if not more percent of the time, we never won because of an idea. In fact, sometimes the idea was a liability. Like, wow, we really loved your approach, but we weren't really sold on your idea. And oftentimes it really was about process. It was about, how are you going to work with us to come up with the idea? And it was kind of this light bulb moment of like, the close isn't the wrapped vehicle in the parking lot that you surprise them with at the end. It's never that. It's, wow, I really felt like Zach and Gina and Nathaniel, people from my current team right now, I just felt like they gelled together as a team and they worked really well with us. And that's why we got hired. So all the free stuff that we do and the investment, it still takes time, but we don't often, for that reason, go in with these fully baked strategies and here's all the things we're going to do. And here's a mock-up of the billboard that we would recommend. It really is just going in and connecting with those people, having conversations, asking them questions, feeling their pain, and not trying to be the smartest agency in the room with the flashiest stuff. So that's beautiful. The question was, how do I define pitching? I'd say it's evolved. And today I define it as a great pitch is actually not a presentation. It's a conversation.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think about some sales training I got a number of years ago with an organization called Sandler Selling. And while the gentleman is a New Jersey stereotype from the 1960s and some of the ways he approaches it and voices it. In fact, I'd be curious to take it again now. I've got to imagine some softening was required in the age we're living in now. A lot of those same things, ring true in terms of like, he talks about don't spill your candy in the waiting room. Instead of hitting them with all of these things you could do, it's more of a matter of like, what do you care about? How do we surface those things? How do we identify we hear them? And then how do we respond to those needs in ways that can find a solution within the constraints of the scope, timeline, and the budget? So a lot of that resonates with me 100%. Well, great. The next topic that is tied to this pretty closely is the notion of RFPs. As I mentioned previously, they do seem to be a requirement in a lot of organizations. I think about government organizations, larger organizations that have processes, procurement departments. They got to get at least 3 responses, et cetera. I guess, what's your beef with RFPs?
Well, am I allowed to use an expletive on this podcast? Do we have an E rating? What's the rating? I can never remember. What's the rating for podcasts?
Use your creative license.
Use my creative license. Okay. Yes. Well, I have taken to calling RFPs really they stand for request for proposal.
Yes.
I have started calling them really fucking pointless. Because here's the thing about RFPs. They are mostly pointless. I have never written a proposal, responded to an RFP that hasn't just pretty quickly gone into the garbage. It oftentimes is this, I think clients don't know what else to do but put out an RFP. So I was just having a conversation with our team a couple of weeks ago. We've gotten a few RFPs, lately. And here's the thing, if we don't have a relationship with that organization or a person there, if we didn't know that RFP was coming, by the time we get it, it is really fucking pointless. for us to respond to it, right? Because you're just in a pack of many, you're reacting, and agencies do this. We all do this. I'm guilty of it. Oh man, they're going to love it when they see our stuff, right? But remember, just like I was saying, to quote Gina Maffei, all agencies are kind of the same. Every one of those proposals is going to have 95% the same information. There's no way in a proposal for those things I was saying that matter most: chemistry, how you come across in the room, how you think, how you interact with them, to sort of leap off the page. So the reason I don't like them is I do think they're fairly pointless, but clients don't know what else to do. That's and it's with no disrespect to our clients out there who we of course love, or prospective clients that may want to hire us. I think sometimes clients do RFPs because it's a lazy tool to force the work onto the agency. We don't really know what we want, but we're going to put some words on the page and we'll send it out there and see what they do. It's a lazy way of starting a conversation, because what's the first thing we're going to do? We're going to say, we have a million questions that you don't really speak about. What's the real problem? Like, why do you want to do X, Y, and Z? Is that even your problem? So what we have started doing at Hubbell, which has been very effective for us, is when we receive an RFP, is to reach back out to them and say, hey, thank you for thinking of us. Thank you for sending this over. And we ask two questions. One, what made you think of Hubbell? And our founder, Ward, he thinks of this very differently. If they say, well, we just Googled, PR firms Portland and your name came up, I'm like, then we're probably not seriously being considered here, and we shouldn't bother. Ward likes that stuff, and we showed up in search results, we should respond. However, so we ask, how did you find out about us? And sometimes it's like, oh, we heard your podcast, or we met Gina at an event last week. That's more personal. Okay, now there's a reason you're actually thinking of our firm. But the second question we ask is, we would prefer not to do a proposal. We'd rather have a meeting. And so can we just dispense with this proposal business? And it's amazing how many clients are like, oh, sure, absolutely. And that to me is the thing that a lot of agencies are afraid to ask.
Yes.
Sometimes it is really just a product of going in and taking control of a situation where I think agencies are told they're not supposed to have control. So right. I'm a very big believer that when you receive something that doesn't make sense to you, that seems, to use the RFP term, really fucking pointless, that is probably not going to land you the business, but well, let's just do it and see what happens. Take control of that situation and say, look, that's not how we do things. That's not the most productive use of our time or your time. Could we do this differently? Could we have a meeting? Or could we at least be able to come in and present to you kind of who we are, how we think, so you can meet the team? I find most times clients are very amenable to doing that and willing to sort of, break their own rules with the whole RFP business. I hope that answered your question, Ben.
No, absolutely. And what I would call that broadly is a pattern interrupt, right? They send out the RFP. They're expecting a very specific response, cadence, and tenor. And you're basically saying, hey, what would you think about kind of throwing that out and just having a conversation, right? And then all of a sudden you get to build the bonding and rapport. You get to see if there's a good fit. You get to ask the questions. And I'm a big believer, kind of to your point earlier, that it's not so much about what you say or provide back. It's more about the kind of questions that you ask, right? And those types of getting them to think a little bit differently and sharing that we've got a different perspective to offer here. That could be really valuable. So no, I agree 100%.
I think so. Blair Enns, who is a really amazing agency consultant, he has a fantastic podcast he does with David Baker called Two Bobs. Encourage any agency owner, leader out there to listen to it. But Blair talks a lot about this problem. And one of the things that I heard him say at some point that really stuck in my brain is that for every, I'm going to screw this up, so apologies, Blair, if I'm not explaining it correctly, but basically for every rule you get the client to break with their RFP, your chances of winning that business increase, right? So if you can start by saying, hey, We really would rather not do a proposal. We'd rather have a meeting. If they agree to that, your odds increase. If they then say, hey, could you put together a line item budget of what each individual thing's going to cost? And you say, we don't know. We don't know what our paid media budget would be. It's all going to be speculative. But what we could do is we could provide you with a scope of work that explains how we might be able to identify some of those costs. And if they agree to that, your odds increase. So every time you're in control of your own pitch process, of your own prospecting process, your odds of winning that business go up. And I think that's a great rule. I've seen that. That's not just Blair, I think, offering an opinion. I think that is anecdotal. We've certainly seen it. I've certainly seen it. But agencies should not be subservient to clients. And I cannot tell you the number of people, Ben, who in our business think that's how it works. Client's always right. Client comes first. No, we say partnership. A lot of people are like, oh, we're your partner. Well, fucking act like it. I'm always amazed at the agencies that are like, well, we're partners with our clients. And I'm like, why don't you act like you are? Right? Why is the answer to everything they want yes? It should be, well, wait a minute, help us understand why this is a problem, right? And those are just more interesting conversations.
Yeah, and including that notion of valuing people's time. I can't tell you how many times people call me at 5:30 on a Friday and like, we got a problem. I need this by this time and I need you to do it. And it's like, I think you have a problem. Our partnership wasn't about, you claiming our time whenever you want it on a weekend. Like we are humans. We have lives. We have other responsibilities. And that's just as a flashpoint, right? Where I've certainly had that situation where people are hitting me up and it's like, clear the decks the whole weekend. I need you. And I want to make sure, at the onset, they understand we're not the best fit if that's the kind of partner you need, because I don't feel like you're doing your work. You're just not doing your work and then putting it on us at a time where we're not being put in a position to be successful, whether it's over a weekend or just a very short time frame.
And I think that's such a good point, Ben. I think that shows up a lot in the dreaded RFP process as well, right? They spend 6 months figuring out, what they want, and then they put it into an RFP, and then they give an agency 2 weeks to respond, right? And I mean, that's just not enough time. It never is, because we're not sitting around with nothing to do. I mean, we're in a time services business. The margins on that time are always stretched. So 2 weeks to respond to this thing that took you 6 months to figure out, and you know more about this than we do. And we get 2 weeks and you take 6 months. And again, that's another thing that we often ask for. Hey, thank you for sending this over. If it's something legitimately that we're interested in, we try to move the date. This is perfect opportunity. We think we'd be really, a good fit for this, but we can't make your deadline. Can we move it out a week, 2 weeks, whatever it needs to be? Again, to quote Blair Enns, if they give on that, your odds have gone up, right? So always being in a situation where you take control and do it from a position, I think to your point, Ben, of like, we're not going to do our best work, right? We're not going to do our best work at 5:30 on a Friday or burning our team out over the weekend. So let's set ourselves up for success and do it in a way that is.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, I've also found very similar to what you're talking about, where, if I do get an RFP, or if I'm talking to someone very early on and they're like, oh, we're developing an RFP, oftentimes I'll offer to say, hey, would you benefit from someone to help you kind of frame up the RFP and put it out to the market in a way that people will be able to get you the apples to apples comparisons that your evaluation team needs to make an informed decision. And that sometimes has worked to our benefit as well.
So it's so funny you say that, Ben. We have a $2 million piece of business right now at Hubbell that started because the client sent me the RFP and was like, can you help me explain what we're looking for? And I took a look at it and I was like, this makes no sense. You're not telling me anything other than like the history of your problem, which is part of the information someone would need. And just by coming in and saying, let me give you some guidance, marked the heck out of that RFP and sent it back. And it showed them like, oh, wait, you actually understand what we need, which then led to my favorite thing, which is led to a meeting, which then led to the business. Right.
Beautiful.
So
Beautiful.
anytime someone's like, hey, would you take a look at this scope of work or RFP because we want to send it out, say yes, and then use that as your way to kind of walk through the door.
Yeah. No, I love that it's not a, roll your eyes and sigh and say, here we go again, but instead here's an invitation to see how we can disrupt this process in a way that's productive for them and helps us get to a point where we can actually evaluate the fit. And of course, feeling empowered, it's a bit of a privilege and a luxury to feel empowered enough to walk away from that business. But I think the more that we flex that muscle and as uncomfortable as it can be, the better we set ourselves and our team and our entire organization up for success.
I think along those lines, Ben, I think the most powerful thing that an agency can say to a client is no. And not enough of us say that word enough, right? We equivocate. We always feel the need to, be apologetic. But when you're asked to do something that either doesn't make sense or quite simply is, you used the 5:30 on a Friday example, is quite simply, not possible by the laws of time and physics. The most powerful thing you can say is, I'm sorry, we can't do that. And not offer the explanation and not offer but here's all the things we will do. But just to say that is just not something that we're equipped to handle. And not enough agencies, again, that's about taking control of the situation. And so much of this, I think this conversation about, free pitches and, spec work and, all that stuff gets to something that we operate from a position of fear in this business. Fear that we're not going to win the business, that our competition might win the business. Or what if, like, I hear this from our founder a lot, what if they never call us again? The truth of the matter is that's probably not going to happen, right? It's this belief that like, oh my gosh, we have to, or, the world's going to end. And I've been in this business long enough to know the world never ends, right? And there will be other opportunities. If it doesn't work out, then that probably is a good sign that it wasn't a good fit. Here's the other thing I hope we get to in this conversation before we wrap up, which is how many people listening to this podcast, or even the two of you, have like won a piece of business and you're so excited and you're like, oh man, this is awesome. We won it. They picked us, we're the best. We feel so good about ourselves. But you go back and you look at all the compromises you made to win it. And within 6 months, you're like, we cannot stand this client. We hate this work. It's, so I'm always like, why not get that over with early, right? If they're not willing to meet you in a place that's going to allow everybody to do your best work, that's your truest sign that they're just not going to be a good client. And we're so afraid that like, oh, but what if they're not going to hire us? What if they don't call us? Sometimes it's a blessing.
Indeed. I've certainly seen that play out many, many times in the last couple of decades here at Cascade. And it is interesting because I know those feelings of desperation when it feels like the pipeline is empty and the workload is drying up and the team's looking at you. And as a business owner, you're thinking about year-end bonuses and retaining your team with raises and other types of tools that require profit, not just revenue, but profit. And all of a sudden you start chipping away at your profit potential to get the revenue. And then with that comes the more emotional damage around, and this is a terrible experience and my team's not enjoying it. And so, yeah, I think, again, feeling like you can show up, not feel like you need the business, steer it in a positive direction, have some of those tough conversations early. Those things will really, really help to set the table such that going forward, everyone does feel like, hey, we're equals. We are partners. This isn't a situation where I started from a position of fear and now I'm operating every day with this fear that if I screw up, there's 6 people behind me in that RFP line that are just chomping at the bit to grab that business and move it forward.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, good. Let's see. Do you currently, I guess on average, when you think about a year at Hubbell, how many RFPs are you disrupting the process by responding to in some form or another?
Gosh, honestly, Ben, I couldn't tell you the last time we responded to an RFP without blowing up the process.
Yeah.
And part of it is, I'd say we probably get a couple of inquiries a month. Some are squirrels, some are whales. Squirrels are like, $100,000 project or a $50,000 project, and a whale is, $500,000 more, right?
Yeah.
And I'd say in pretty much, and the other thing is, I think for folks listening, remember, just because it's a $500,000, $500,000 piece of business doesn't mean you break your own rules and go, oh, well, in fact, if anything, it's all the more reason to sort of follow some of these principles and sort of stick to sort of your way of doing things. Take control of the process. But we probably get, I don't know, a dozen plus requests in some form. We always try to be disruptive with it and ask for the meeting, not do the proposal.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time we truly did a quote unquote proposal. We've had, it's weird. There's been this little, I'm sure you guys probably have experienced this. I've talked to other agencies out there. They're all experiencing this. I think Q1 of this year was just a particularly kind of slowish, quieter, not a lot of activity seemed to be happening. But now that's sort of shifting. We've gotten, I'd say, a half dozen in the last couple months
Wow.
in various forms. And honestly, we've said no to quite a few of them because we're like, don't know the client, don't know anybody on the inside, budget's too small, or they're asking for us to do something in a short period of time that we're just not willing to do. There have been some where we've received the request, we've reached out, hey, we need to move the date. Sorry, you're hitting us right as a vacation starting and we just can't meet this. And they're like, sorry, the date's set. And we say, sorry, then we're not the agency for you. So, I think in every instance we try to, we never just, do the like, yes, okay, what do you want? What do you need? We never do that. We just try to create the sort of process as we want it to exist. And you win some of those. Those are I think the good ones. And you don't get the rest, which is fine.
Absolutely. You mentioned some criteria earlier about when the signs are lined up for it to be an RFP worth responding to. I think I heard one, tight relationship with a person on the inside. These are some of the things that we look at. If we've got a relationship with someone on the inside, that organization, that's okay, cool. Let's keep talking. Clear understanding of the selection process. I find that to be incredibly valuable. I've worked with some community organizations where the board are a number of community stakeholders, but in some cases they have no technology perspective. So you kind of wonder what kind of criteria are they using to make this really important investment on behalf of these funds. Let's see, limited number of respondents to the RFP. I mean, I remember a cattle call with a large footwear company here in Portland. They got like hundreds of responses, and you're just like, that's terrible for the footwear organization as well as all these people that are spending all this time pitching. Let's see, a well-written evaluation criteria is included in there so that we have a good understanding and we can speak to that evaluation criteria. The evaluation team, knowing who the evaluation team is made up of, what they care about, and that hopefully they're not seeking a bunch of free work as part of that response. Did I leave anything out there in terms of criteria that your team cares about when they're scrubbing them down?
Yes. One very important thing I always ask, who is making the decision? The number of times that we are put in a room with 6, 7, 8 people, and what they often have done, sometimes it literally is a project team, and that then it makes sense. But I've been in situations where it's like they took Sally from marketing, and then they took Bob from public relations, and they took their government affairs person. Like, we didn't know who else to come in and evaluate you, so this is who we chose. And I always am like, okay, there's 8 people in the room, 7 of them aren't making the decision.
Yep.
Right. They have a voice in the process, but there has got to be one person making the decision. And the other thing I always push for is, if they tell me, oh, well, Steve on the 7th floor, who's not in the meeting, is the one that makes the decision, I'm like, then we need to be meeting with Steve.
Amen. Yes, sir.
Or
Yes,
Sally
sir.
or whomever, right? And I can't tell you the number of times that you're meeting with the team that's almost just like they're being sent out to scout the buffalo, and the actual people that are going to do the kill don't even show up for the hunt. And it's like, well, I want to meet with the people that are actually going to be in the driver's seat of this. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah. And I think a nuanced way of addressing that is that I found it can be pretty helpful is instead of confronting that person who's trying to show up and appear, to have authority and drive this conversation, that I say to them, hey, can I be helpful to you in taking this information to the person who's making this decision and flesh this out a little bit and ask some more questions and be in a position to field the questions that I can anticipate they're going to ask. And sometimes the person, who is not the decision maker looks at that and goes, oh, I'd be so relieved. I'm really not qualified to present this and get those questions back. So I don't know, something to think about there as a way to soften that request to be taken to their leader.
Yeah. Well, and I think you mentioned evaluation criteria. I'm often shocked at the number of requests, whether it's an RFP or can you put together, some sort of deck proposal, whatever it is. They're asking for all this work and all this information. And you say, okay, well, help me understand, like, how are you evaluating firms? And they don't have an answer. I'm like, then you don't need all this information, right? If you're just going to go with like, oh, we thought Ben was awesome. Well, then let's just dispense with the rest of this. You don't really need the rest of this information. And the one thing I will say that's a qualifier in all of this is I've had this conversation with many clients, prospective clients, and I've said, look, your process of hiring us was just not great. I would encourage you to make some changes. And I've had people say, Zach, I hear you, but we have a corporate procurement department that just has forms that they're filling out, and there's boxes they want checked, and there's just stuff we got to have you do. And if that's the case, then fine. I'm willing to go through it because I understand that a big, steering a ship that size is very difficult to do. But at the same time, like really trying to understand what is the most important information for us to share. Because sometimes I've been in situations where we've gone in the room and we've thought, oh, wow, this thing is what they really care about. And we talk about it over and over and over again. And then we don't get the business, and you ask them afterwards, well, can you give us some feedback? And they're like, all you talked about was this thing, and that's not really what we wanted. So like really understanding like what is the most important thing we can share with you, and then build your presentation, build your meeting, your conversation around that. But we just oftentimes don't ask that question. We're like, oh, they said they really want to know about our team, so we're going to talk about our team. We sometimes miss the boat on that.
I agree. That's helpful. Well, and I think one thing that I think about here with Cascade is, instead of trying to go out and find and claim this business, right, to be the one who's selected in this competitive process, I always think about what can we do as an organization to create gravitational pull and attraction toward us, right? How do we get more and more people to identify us and either view us as a strong referral opportunity for someone that they know, or someone who's got a need to look and say, gosh, I've got enough information, or there's enough content and information about this organization that I can put them forward aggressively. So as you think about that notion of creating this gravitational attraction for Hubbell, what are some of the tools that you think have been most effective, or that other agencies ought to consider to put yourself in a better position to win business without having to aggressively compete and play some of these games that oftentimes these procurement departments are crafting for us?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of this has to do with the whole notion of positioning, right? You want to be the foremost person that people think of for a thing, or a problem or an approach, a culture, whatever it is, you want to be as, at the top of people's, list, instead of well, we need to have 5 proposals. So somebody Google some other firms and we'll send it to, 4 others. And I think that a lot of times there's a relentless need always, I think, to be out, meeting people. We always wrestle with the word networking, and, I always try to tell people it's called business development for a reason. The development part is really where the work is, right? We get sometimes so focused on, like, an RFP. It's this immediate, like a drug injection, like, oh man, there's this opportunity. Oh, let's go. Well, if you haven't done the development part, you're probably not well positioned to win that business. So what we try to do at Hubbell is, yes, we network. Yes, we do the circuits and the, post COVID, we're back to, I think, the rubber chicken dinner stuff. Be out in the community. That's a big focus for us. Is we try not to call it networking. It's just be out in the community, right? Find an issue, find an organization that you're passionate about, be out there. That's a component of it. But the other thing we try to do in positioning ourselves is to show people the kind of firm we are, so that they associate us as being that kind of firm. So you mentioned our podcast, the Better Communities Podcast. Thank you for the plug. I'm now going to plug it again. We very intentionally went out to do a podcast that was not about us. It was not about public relations or public affairs. It was not about marketing or creative. And it was not to pitch our services or sell Hubbell, but it was to talk about the problems that we're oftentimes in the middle of facilitating solutions to. So we just did one recently. Yes, it was about, we used the I-5 bridge replacement, which is, big topic right now. But really what it was about is why it can be so difficult when we all agree on a problem to come together and come up with a solution. Like, that's a problem that's existed for, 2 decades now, and we're still talking about it. Mm-hmm. Why is it so difficult for us, even when we agree, to just make something happen? And what are some of the tips and tricks? So that's us putting content out that sort of showcases the type of work we are often in the middle of. We did one on cancel culture on college campuses, right? Where's that line between, free speech and open discourse, and the need to support, historically marginalized communities and make students feel safe and all those things? Where's that line? That's a tension point. I think what we try to do is put out interesting content. One of the other things we made a decision in 2020, to think about, well, what are the things that we could be doing as a company to lead from the front, instead of doing what a lot of agencies do, which is try to follow along. Oh, we should, my favorite thing is, oh, I saw somebody else's agency on Instagram, we should have an Instagram profile. No, right? That is a terrible way to make, decisions about how to promote or market your agency. But so it was the 100th anniversary so it was the centennial of the women's suffrage movement that, provided women access to the ballot in 1920. 2020 was the 100-year anniversary of that. And we sort of looked at that and thought, wow, but truly that doesn't tell the whole story, because 1920, not all women were given the right to vote. White women were given the right to vote. And here we are at this historic time. We made a decision to really zero in on this question of, like, most people don't understand voting rights or the history of voting rights. So we launched this initiative called the 2120 Initiative to just start conversations and to promote more people learning about and educating themselves about voting rights. What are they? What does voter suppression look like? What does voter disenfranchisement look like? And we kind of flipped the whole notion of the celebration of the 19th Amendment on its head. And we just said, but the fight never ends. Like to sort of think to ourselves, oh, well, women were given the right to vote. No, not all women were given the right to vote. And many still do not. They still do fight to have access to the ballot. But that just puts us in a different category, right? It doesn't put us with the like, here's the 5 best ways to, build a coalition, right? There's tons of information on the internet about that. It's not going to differentiate us. Or like, here's, best crisis PR tips. I mean, you Google that on any search engine, you're going to find a gazillion results that are all probably going to say the same thing.
And ChatGPT's got you now.
I was going to say, anything you can do to say, what do we care about? What are the things that we're in the middle of? And how can we create content around that? I think is a winning strategy. It's less transactional. It's less salesy. I think some agencies will find that stuff works for them. Others may not. But I think what it does is it elevates your agency and sort of the things you care about in a different way. And it's stickier, right? People remember, oh gosh, I saw you guys did that big thing on voting rights, right? Or I just heard the podcast on the I-5 bridge. They don't remember, oh, I saw your blog post about the 3 things to include in a press release. They just don't remember that. So positioning, I think, is the answer to your question. Long-winded answer to your question, Ben.
No, really valuable. I mean, the business development and positioning, I think those are 2 great elements to kind of wrap things up with. I've been a big fan of that podcast and some of that critical review and the interview style, those varying perspectives. It just feels like, gosh, you're going deeper on these subjects. We're not just beating the drum and celebrating what we're told to celebrate through some sort of a filtered perspective, but peeling back some layers, asking some better questions, and steering that conversation forward. So, well, yeah. Zach, I'm grateful, for our friendship and connection over the years. Always look forward to our time together, sharing notes, and really grateful for you joining us on this podcast. I think this is not only some fun stuff to chop up and share with our audience, but also some really compelling things for Simon and I to consider as we carry this podcast forward and determine how do we want to show up and what do we feel is worthy of putting out there into the ever more crowded podcast realm. So I thank you for your time. I do encourage you to jump back into vacation mode and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, well, I will say, for the benefit of your listeners, Ben, that you were my very first ever. I've done a couple, 3 podcasts in my day in terms of hosting, and the first one I ever did, you were the first person that I ever interviewed. And I was like, I've never done this before. I don't really know what I'm doing. You were very generous and very willing to put yourself out there and in the hands of a complete amateur with no experience. And when you asked me to do this, I was like, vacation be damned. Tell me where you need me to be. And always happy to help you, my friend. Mad respect.
Thank you very much. Well, Simon, thanks for joining us and keeping this thing moving forward. And we'll look forward to connecting with everyone again on our next podcast.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.